Renaissance was a cultural movement that spanned the 1920s. At the time, it was known as the New Negro Movement, named after the 1925 anthology by Alain Locke. The movement also included the new African American cultural expressions across the urban areas in the Northeast and Midwest parts of the United States. These were also the parts which were affected the most by the Great Migration, of which Harlem was the most popular. Though it was centered in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City, in addition, many Francophone black writers from African and Caribbean colonies who lived in Paris were also influenced by this revolution. The Harlem Renaissance is generally considered to have spanned from about 1919 to the early or mid-1930s. The Harlem Renaissance was an age of great art, and many black artists flourished in this time period.
Sterling A. Brown, an African-American professor, poet, author, and folklore teller. Sterling was born on May the 1st, 1901. He had his education in the southern part of the United States. Sterling graduated as a top student. Sterling started his teaching career with positions in many universities. His father, being a former slave and growing up in Tennessee, inspired him with the culture of the African American people. During his education, he went to many schools and universities, including Harvard University. He introduced his students in concepts of the black culture, in examples of jazz and blues, and other works of the African culture. Brown published his first novel in 1932, called The Southern True. Brown wrote many poems and other works to do with the African culture. Overall, Sterling was an inspired man towards the African American culture during this time period. He was a great addition to the Harlem Renaissance. He died January 13th, 1989. A great poet, folklore teller, and professor.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the poem called Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I's been a climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark. So boy, don't turn your back. Don't you sit down on the steps, 'cause you finds it kinda harder. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I still climb, and life for me ain't be no crystal stair.
Well, this poem, Mother to Son, was written by Langston Hughes. It is a mother giving advice to a son. That's why it's called Mother to Son. As you can see, as a metaphor, tacks and splinters and a stairway, that meaning she had a difficult life with all different kind of problems ahead of her. As you can also see, where was it? In the dark year, it means she never knew what was about to happen or what was going on next. And if you think about tacks and splinters and boarded up thorns, you always think about poverty. So this woman must have lived in poverty. As also, you can see other bad spelling from I've seen been a climbing, meaning that she was not very well educated, so she didn't have a lot of opportunities to go out of poverty. Also, I know this is about a African American because in the 1900s, Langston Hughes used to write a lot about African Americans and how their problems were. This woman is her personality is determined and strong, but she's also caring. This entire poem is extended metaphor for showing imagery on how her life was and how determined she and willpower she had to come true and try to make it out of poverty.
Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was born on the 1st of February 1902. He was an African-American poet, writer. He was also a playwright and a social activist. He was one of the first people to create and use the art form known as jazz poetry, which in that time was a new type of poetry. He was best known as one of the leaders of the Harlem Renaissance, especially because all his poems related to it and related to the way that he felt about it and the way that he felt about racism. During his education, he was one of 2 black children in the whole class, and he felt that he was a victim of stereotypes. Although when his English teacher was pressuring very much that poetry must have rhythm, when he was able to show that he had great rhythm, he was elected class poet. One of the first poem that he wrote in high school, and it was called When Sue Wears Red. When he was growing up, he had many random jobs. For example, in one time he became a crewman for a ship, but all the while he was still writing poetry. In the early 1920s, during his time in England, he became a part of the black expatriate community. After going to university and gaining a sufficient degree, he moved to Harlem, and where he would live the rest of his life.
Okay, thank you.
Fred, you guys might want to check how to spell your name next time.
Nice name.
Stop.